Hello again, friends, and welcome to the Learning Future podcast with me, Luca Parry. Today, we've got a wonderful conversation and a wonderful guest, and it's with Alex Battison. He's the Senior Deputy Head at Lord Wandsworth College in Hampshire in the United Kingdom. Previous to that, he was on the senior leadership team at Wells Cathedral School in Somerset and has taught at other colleges across the UK. He's currently Chair of Educational Futures at Harvard's Human Flourishing program. And in May last year, he was one of 51 individuals convened to discuss the future of education at Salzburg Global Seminar in Austria, which, funnily enough, is where we met, Alex. So it's wonderful to reconnect with you.
It is.
Of course,
yeah, great to see you again, Luca.
It's really good. It's really good. Of course, we had some of that work that was then published at the UN Conference for Transforming Education in New York. And Alex also he's an RSA fellow as well, but has a master's in learning and teaching from Oxford and is currently in the last year of a doctorate in leadership, learning and policy from Bristol University. I'd love to know how that's going, mate, and how close you are to that. But welcome to the podcast and really excited to discuss education transformation with you.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Mate, so question one is it's kind of a broad question, but this entire podcast, my entire raison d'etre is really about unlocking learning, the art, the science, the craft. What are you learning? What's one thing you're learning at the moment that you want to share?
Yeah, cool. So I connected a little bit with a doctorate that you mentioned, and some conversations that I'm having around change. And yesterday I had a really interesting conversation that followed up on some research I was doing. It's put pretty simply, but I think there's some interesting sort of concepts behind it. But this fellow I was talking to was discussing three different types of change. So incremental change, transformational change, and disruptive change.
Interesting.
And for me, it was interesting on sort of two levels. So one, how a school might be able to consider how they are engaging in change. What are they incrementally doing, tweaking, making even better, sustaining?
Yeah.
What are they transforming? What, one or two things are they becoming, best in class at? And then what are they disrupting? So, what one area are they really disrupting the world of education with? They're creating the future of education in a particular area. And, this guy I was talking to was also just sort of chatting about the nature of disruption.
Yeah.
And I think I'd sometimes used transformation and disruption as synonyms, and perhaps they are through one perspective. He was arguing that they're not, and disruption contains destruction. So if you're going to disrupt something, and if you're going to disrupt a system, for example, then there's got to be some decay and destruction of the present.
Yes.
To, as part of being involved in that disruptive process.
Yeah.
Whereas transformation doesn't necessarily have that destruction and decay, which I thought was a really interesting way of looking at it.
Mate, that's a really great start. I think it's a really great chat. But look, because absolutely, a lot of the conversations we've had so far, and you can see the bias really is towards the transformation agenda that's required and work that we've put together, and clearly that even the UN is focused on in terms of its Transforming Education Summit, and that being the headline. And we've had a wonderful conversation with Lasse on this podcast as well from 100. He talks about how difficult it is to let things go, like to let things decay in education. It feels almost against our duty of care in some ways. It's like, it seems like, and you're currently in a school, in a leadership role alongside your other international work. Clearly, it's just like, here's another thing to do, as opposed to what do we let go of? What kind of, and it's the creative, destructive nature of entrepreneurship or innovation, and disruptive innovation, as of course it's also been famously framed at. Do you think that's the right balance? 70, 20, 10, 70% improvement, 20% transformation, 10% disruption. Or do you think that now in the age of AI, do you think there really needs to be a different way of thinking about it?
Yeah, interesting question. I think ultimately, when I think about education, and when you do, Luca, and I'm sure when so many of the listeners do, I think we're actually talking about the future of humanity. And we're talking about education as a as a guide through to that future, as a hand, a comforting, compassionate, loving, inspirational hand to hold as we investigate the possible futures of humanity in an era, whereas I'm sure, listeners will connect to, is pretty challenging at the moment in lots of different ways. I think we live in an age of gaps, widening gaps all over the place, and we need a society that can bring that together, that can heal wounds, that can be optimistic about a future with hope and educated hope, in a way that brings realities to bore. So I think part of that, there's sort of massive stakeholder management in any process of change.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that thinking about what to let go of is really important. Come back to your question.
Yeah.
I think and it's all interconnected, isn't it? And I think part of the issue with our education system, and therefore part of the issue perhaps with people like me who work in the education system, that we can take on some of the systemic thinking within the system we're in. So,
yeah,
I may well be blinded by the fact that, we do this and the system's affected me, I affect the system, we sustain each other. So
yeah,
I think it's really interesting, before we get to that point of thinking what to let go or what to innovate or what have you, but to go through a stage of personal transformation first.
nice.
To develop a really clear purpose within who we are. To have a dream, not a mission statement or a goal, or if it's good enough for Martin Luther King, it's good enough for us.
Yeah.
But have a dream, have a six word max statement of what we're all about in life as a person. That's lofty, that's ambitious. We might not hit it, but we're going to chase it. And once we've gone through that sort of process, we're more aware of ourselves. We're really aware of our context and all the things that might affect the system that we're in. Then I think we can start envisaging a future.
Yeah.
We can start thinking about what might be currently happening in the present that is enabling that future vision, and also what's the way to the past, like what's happened in the past, and therefore what's been influenced now that might be holding that vision back.
Yeah.
And once we have that holistic view, I think we can then decide, actually, I think we should be, starting to let this sort of gently subside, or actually this needs to be hit really hard straight away. We need to try and minimize this. We need to try and find a way of amplifying this, of moving these pieces to enable this to emerge. So it's a really holistic sort of systems design thinking view within an organization. And I think that's a challenge and an opportunity, right?
Mate, it's so much about the way we see, I think. And even like, do we see problems or do we see possibilities? Do we narrow our frame of reference or do we open our frame of reference? And of course, double diamond thinking and human-centered design and design thinking and all the rest of it. But also like this futures literacy work, that is work that we do quite a lot of at the Learning Future, because it's this idea of we actually are trying to learn to see differently by visiting the future 5+ years beyond the current strategic cycle. How do we stretch ourselves such that we can sever our relationship to kind of old constructs? And so I also love what you said about I have a dream and kind of transformation. I think it's Gandhi. It's one wonderful quote. It's like, we're all out there trying to change the world, but we must start by changing ourselves. And like all transformation begins with inner transformation, self-transformation, like the interior sciences then meet the exterior world. How we see ourselves is how we often see the world. And all that kind of personal work, and hence the leadership work and much of the work that you've led and been part of. But this question I have for you is one around the construct. I'd be a bit stronger than you said. We may well, I think you said, we may well kind of have internalized part of that. I think we absolutely do that, Alex. We do. We internalize the systems in which we live, work, learn, play. They become us. And so I guess my question to you is, and then we become, it's not willfully blind. It just becomes the unknown unknowns. It's kind of, this is the David Foster Wallace, what is water? if you ask fish what is water, they don't know the answer because it's everywhere around them. They've never had to ask. They've never been outside of water. And it's, I think, like if you're in a school or in a system, or if I'm in an organization over here or doing our work, we all just start to internalize this stuff, and then we end up with these mental models that actually have all these assumptions baked into them. So how have you learned to see differently, Alex? Because that's what I've got in our conversations, since Salzburg, is that you are absolutely attempting to see the future as one that matters for humanity, not for just employability, which is critical. But so how would you reflect on that very surface level question?
And look, I wish I could tell you that a number of years ago I intentionally set out to challenge my own thinking and to think differently and to engage in personal transformation. I wish I could tell you that, but in actual fact, I sort of stumbled across it rather than it being anything intentional.
Interesting.
I think it probably plays a little bit to my own story and going to wanting to sort of make a bit of career out of rugby when I was a bit younger. Going to what in effect was a sort of polytechnic, not getting a great degree, focusing on the wrong stuff, and then going through becoming a PE teacher, which is where I started out. Chatting to my wife actually, who was a history teacher and still is, and she talked to me a lot about pedagogy, and I thought, crikey, actually, through my own PE teaching degree, I hadn't necessarily recognised pedagogy and the science of teaching and learning, and that really gripped me. And so I investigated that, and I suppose then I just tried to stay really open to difference. So along my journey, my teaching and coaching journey, I met some really inspirational people. So for me, Brian Ashton, who used to coach the England rugby side,
Wow.
he's always been an absolute outlier in global coaching. The sort of vision that he has had for creating difference and inspiring the future of coaching. That I was privileged enough to meet him, and we've developed a relationship over the years where that sort of thinking quite early on. I was probably 24, 25 when I met him.
Yeah.
And so there's been sort of disruptive influences there. And then there's a book called Steal Like an Artist. And that sort of sums up the approach, actually. It's just been sort of magpieing from as many different people as possible who have been outside of the realm of teaching, ideally. Started off with talking about pedagogy and how that can be transformational for a person and a teacher, but then just meeting lots of people who challenge the status quo. And that, I think, then enabled me to put a mirror on my own life and how actually, I should challenge the status quo too. So how can this guy who, underperformed at a university, actually transform himself? So I went on that personal journey, took that pedagogy on, went to Oxford, now in the latter stages, thank goodness, of a doctorate.
Well done.
And I've just exposed myself to as much difference as possible. I think that's really been key to it, to try and unlock my assumptions, become more self-aware of the system that I'm in and the things that affect me, and try and shape me, and then be better placed to try and push back where I don't agree with it.
Beautiful, Alex. That's a really powerful story. And because it's a story that's, in some ways, it has universal elements to it, which is this, like, what are we choosing in our lives? Are we choosing to expand or are we choosing to contract? And I just wonder about our systems sometimes that we've inherited. And we call these often legacy systems or palliative systems, if we're being less polite, mental models that are no longer in service of true human flourishing. They are in service of organization, or of an efficiency paradigm, or of a standardization agenda, which were important at one point in history, but now are no longer at all fit for purpose. So it's not, of course, our fault that we're in these systems. They were designed long ago, and they're not broken. They just operate in existing mental models that are no longer in service of true human growth, development, multidimensionally, social, emotional, cognitive, physical, spiritual, the whole human, not least of all in this digital era. So I just love that story, mate. And this idea of stepping outside to look backwards or to look back into where one has come from. And that in every element of our life, every holonic evolution, where we kind of put another layer. Of course, that we still have the core, but we have another layer. Isn't that kind of, we build this way? So I want you to talk a little bit to the Human Flourishing program at Harvard, because as chair of the Ed Futures work there, clearly the repurposing of education is part of this. It's telling the new story, or the new education story, as our big change friends would say, who have also been on the podcast. But, how do you think that reframe, that repurposing, how impactful can that be?
So yeah, I think it's really important to think about flourishing in its multi-dimensional concepts. Putting the individual right at the heart of an education process. We talked a lot about systems and a lot about change so far, and we haven't talked about individuals. And of course, young people, parents, teachers, society, every member of society. Education is everyone's business, and I think thinking about flourishing is I think the first thing that we think about. We then think about education and how education can help societal flourishing and the future of humanity. I think that's the right way to do it. I think we've got to. I talked about a dream earlier on. I think we've got to chase that big dream, and then think about the ways in which we can enable society to be co-constructed, if it wishes to be, towards those dreams,
with the features,
co-produced
Alex,
of what the future can be.
How would you say, just for people that don't know this construct of flourishing, it sounds lovely, and how would you define that? How would you explain the difference between flourishing and achieving, for example?
So for me, flourishing is around having a deep sense of fulfillment. So not necessarily a happiness. I'm sure happiness comes into it, but a fulfillment, a sense of purpose, a recognition of ourselves in a positive way, a contentment in relation to where we are in the world, who we're interacting with, and how we're experiencing that interaction in life. And I think flourishing is absolutely about how we experience all of that together. It's absolutely about love. It's absolutely about riding challenges, how we ride the challenges of life. It's absolutely about connecting with people, collaborating with people, co-creating with people, and committing to what our purpose is. For me, that's a really strong insight into how I view flourishing.
Gosh, it's beautiful.
We got some 4 C's there, haven't we? We got co-creating, connecting, collaborating, committing.
They've always been C's for some reason, it's a good letters to start things with. I wonder,
that's it.
I wonder, Alex, about what we're really talking about here is kind of one of the deepest spiritual question there is. Like, what's it all for? What's a life well lived? What's an education well made, well experienced? And I feel like part of that is the measurement piece that we haven't discussed today, but there's something about seeing the data, for example, when you think of the science of learning, in this case, like knowing that there's been a shift from one state to another, quantitatively and qualitatively. So how do you see that, like the Flourishing program and other movements like it, like the Flourishing work from UPenn and Martin Seligman, for example, with PERMA plus V and all these other kind of models around well-being, like, the OECD doing their study in social and emotional skills across the world, for example, that we're connected through Salzburg too. So how do you think that like, because there is like a change in the narrative, and then there's kind of the level below, and you're in the school. You could have the nicest vision statement ever. I'm sure you do. But the hidden grammar of the school is actually what matters. It's what's happening day to day. And you get a report card or something, and if it's got nothing on flourishing in it, well, then clearly there's this disconnect. What's your view on kind of the measurement, or the way that we can kind of strengthen empirically this transformation, this change?
I think certainly the group that I chair out of the community of practice, I think we would feel that at the moment there are pretty basic measurements of success in schools. We've got sort of historical hangovers with academic measurements, and in this country that's GCSEs and A levels predominantly.
Yes.
And they have a purpose, and they've had a purpose, and at the same time, in a snapshot, they tell us very little, I would argue, about the beautiful complexity of an individual. And it's that beautiful complexity that enables an individual to flourish when, almost like sort of two neurons, when they're sort of sending messages to each other and
yes,
making new connections and exploring possibilities. It's not a rudimentary set of scores. It's the beautiful complexity of a person that is where flourishing at its heart is located. And so I think there are lots of different models out there that are looking to try and appreciate the diversity of a human being, and how we might be able to support the development of an individual within their journey, and how we can if we want to take a snapshot, how we can take a snapshot of the multiplicity of their capabilities at that moment in time through their journey of development. I think the mastery transcript from a school's perspective is interesting in the US and more broadly.
Yeah.
I know that Rethinking Assessment, based in the UK, are doing some really interesting work in regards to a really holistic portfolio for an individual that represents their multiple intelligences, rather than the relatively narrow set that could be represented via the sort of traditional grading system academically. So there are absolutely models out there that seek to represent the complexity of a human being. And certainly with my research hat on, this is absolute social science territory. It is, I think, any sort of model that's created needs to bear context in mind, and the community within which an individual is being raised in, and also maybe certain key attributes that a community might agree upon, as well as just making sure that it's broad and personalized and supportive, so that something is there, not to say, right, the aim of this measure is to put you in a box and give you anxiety and et cetera, et cetera. It's to enable you and the people around you to recognize where you might be at the moment, and think about where you might want to travel next along this purpose journey, and what you might want to make even better, and what you frankly think isn't good enough at the moment, and what you should celebrate.
Yeah.
So I think a holistic view is really important.
It really feels like post-COVID, if I can be bold in that statement, that we are, well-being as a key construct and narrative, agency, co-agency, as another, sense of connectedness and belonging. Like, what are the most human things about our schools? These kind of experiences, the embodiment work that PE teachers have been doing for a very long time. Out of the mind into the body, the body-mind connection that the cutting edge sciences are just really revealing some remarkable things about how our minds can make us sick, and they can therefore make us well. Our thoughts literally shape our physical health. I mean, this empirical ground is really being expanded at such a rapid rate, and we haven't even pressed go on AI on some of this stuff. So that's what happened to. So I just think that's a whole other conversation. But this piece on, I think this human flourishing, the irreducibly unique, what is it, 86 billion neurons in the human brain or something. And so, how are they that makes all of us pretty unique, because no one has the same brain anywhere. And so how might we contribute? What might be ours to do in the economy, in our community, in our world, in our society? I mean, those seems to be the questions. And your piece on fulfillment. I mean, what if, Alex, if when we thought about the role that schools played, we centralized fulfillment as its key raison d'etre instead of achievement? And that itself would be such a transformation. I think there would be different decisions made and different structures proposed. May I got two final questions for you?
Just to speak to that point, I
Please.
think what came up to me there was the importance of intergenerational work, which I think both of us, excuse me, really passionate about.
Yeah.
And enabling adults, particularly, and talking for myself, this has been part, I think, of my personal transformation. Learning to hold space for young people rather than power over them has been an absolute sort of key part of thinking about how to create more sustainable and just futures by working with young people and breaking down that hierarchy that can exist so frequently in society, because the history that we've been built upon. I'm not saying that's all bad. I'm not sort of at one extreme or the other, but just it's just really interesting to hold that in tension.
Yes.
And so to explore intergenerational leadership and intergenerational co-construction and co-production is, I think, an absolute aspect of my sort of vision for society and for humanity through education. And then you mentioned fulfillment and success, and I think certainly in regards to change, even if we're going to turn the needle by sort of move a school an inch to the left, it's absolutely about raising the consciousness of the different aspects that we might want to be achieving. And earlier in the conversation, we were talking about becoming more self-aware of us, becoming more self-aware of the structures and systems that we've lived in and been brought up in, and how they're having an effect on us.
Yes.
And so actually holding fulfillment alongside a community's definition of success, holding them in a healthy tension, to be able to talk to communities and have that discursive conversation in regards to where do we want to go with these things? Are they mutually exclusive? To what extent can they work together and merge? Let's have a conversation about that, but let's not just have a conversation about that with people who think the same, who are the same age as us. Let's have conversations about that with people, with a diversity of people who can co-construct, and let's be authentic in what we're saying. So that if we're saying we believe in co-constructed futures in this way, then our sort of methodology of going through this process has got to involve co-construction and authentic co-construction. We've got to show integrity there. So I just wanted to share those. The two things came.
Brilliant.
The inspirational. They triggered that with me. So
mate, absolutely, just keep ping ponging all the time. I mean, that's why we think co-design is really the future of any system change. You need multi-stakeholder, diverse perspectives that put the problem in the middle, that possibility set in the middle, or the challenge catalog, come up collectively with a range of solutions using, divergent and convergent thinking techniques, and then prototype them and test them. And then from that place, upscale or even better, spread, which means spreading versus scaling, metaphors, spreading contextually relevant, scaling, pressing the button and hoping it goes to scale, which is also another way. But mate, so much more we could talk about. Let's make this part one. My final question to you, Alex, is simply this. What's your take-home message based on what you're thinking about in our conversation tonight? What would you like our listeners to have ruminating in their minds?
I think do everything you can whilst paying attention to what matters to you most in life. Do everything you can to reach out within networks, to have conversations, to speak to different perspectives to your own, to build a vision within yourself for what you would want humanity to look like, and find where your niche is within that. Find where your area of most vibrant flourishing is for you within that. And once you've got that vision, chase it. Be content that life is complex and things will emerge and we can't plan everything. But be honest with yourself, with your purpose. Operate with your ABCs. Be ambitious for it. Believe in it. And be courageous enough to follow through with it. And you will find that there's a community out there to support you with it. And we're 2 examples. There we go. That's probably
Alex, that's great. I was kind of getting vibes of like being kind of on the rugby field, like, you know, just before the second of it, about to go out and face the Wallabies or something, mate.
Yeah.
You've obviously had
experience coming up this year to a TV screen near you.
Brilliant. Love it. Alex, thank you so much for your time, mate, all the way there from the UK. This has been a delightful discussion on flourishing, fulfillment, system change, individual pursuit of what matters most in life. And, you know, the fact that we can't transform anything unless we start with ourselves. So, mate, thank you for joining us and all the best with the journey ahead.
Absolute pleasure, Luca. Thanks very much. And thanks for everyone tuning in. Appreciate it.